Picture this. It's September 1565, the Florida coast. The heat isn't just a temperature, it's a physical weight, a thick, salty shroud that smells of rotting seaweed, damp palmetto leaves, and the sharp, metallic tang of rusted iron. Inside, the salt-sprayed hulls of 11 battered galleons, over 800 weary souls are gasping for air. Soldiers are sweating through their heavy wool doublets, swatting at swarms of relentless salt marsh mosquitoes that have become as much of a threat as the French fleet lurking somewhere in the Atlantic fog. These men aren't just explorers, they are a desperate gamble. If they fail, Spain loses its grip on the North American continent, and they will likely end up as casualties of a wilderness that doesn't care for European steel. But here's the thing. We've seen the oil paintings of the founding. We know the name Pedro Menendez de Aviles. We've read the bronze plaques near the bayfront. But what about the world outside those formal histories? What did the water actually taste like when it was pulled from a shallow sandy well? What did the rhythmic, deafening roar of the Atlantic surf sound like to a man who hadn't seen solid ground in months? What kind of spirit was required to build a city in a place that seemed designed to swallow it whole? Most history books give you a sanitized, silent, and frankly, two-dimensional version of the past. We're doing something different. By cross-referencing 16th century naval logs, colonial supply manifests, and the latest archaeological discoveries at the site of the Saloy village, we have digitally resurrected the living, breathing street Augustine of 1565. This isn't a trolley tour where you watch from a distance. This is a sensory plunge into the most isolated and dangerous frontier of the Spanish Empire. A tiny outpost of 800 souls, hardened soldiers, anxious families, and friars, all clinging to a narrow strip of sand on the edge of a global explosion. But before we talk about the battles, we have to understand the ground. Why did this particular spot survive when every other attempt before it was reclaimed by the swamp? And what was the miracle material hidden in the sand that would eventually make this city immortal? Let's step back 460 years. To find the answer, we have to look down at the very ground beneath your feet. Long before the first brick was laid or the first cannon fired, this landscape belonged to the Timucua. But forget the primitive stereotypes you've seen in old textbooks. This was a civilization of silent architects who built their world out of the ocean itself. As you walk through the village of Saloy, the exact spot where the Spanish would later plant their cross, the first thing you notice isn't the forest. It's the mountains of white. You are standing on middens, staggering, artificial hills made of millions upon millions of discarded oyster and clam shells, built up over thousands of years. They aren't just trash heaps, they are the literal foundation of their culture, elevating their homes above the swampy tide and providing a high-ground vantage point against enemies. The air here tastes different. It's a thick mix of briny salt spray and the sweet, heavy scent of wood-fired pottery and roasted venison. Listen closely. You hear the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of stone tools carving out massive dugout canoes from fallen cypress trees vessels, capable of navigating the treacherous currents of the Matanzas River with surgical precision. But it's the people who stop you in your tracks. To a 16th century European, the Timucua look like giants. They are tall, athletic, and their skin is a living canvas. Every inch of their bodies, from their foreheads to their ankles, is covered in elaborate, swirling tattoos of dark blue ink, telling the story of their lineage and their prowess in war. They are a matrilineal society, where power flows through the women, and they move through this humid labyrinth with a confidence that only comes from 12,000 years of belonging. They were the masters of this coast long before any European mapmaker dared to draw its outline. They knew how to survive the hurricanes and the heat. They were the ones who greeted the Spanish, not with arrows, but with a cautious curiosity. Yet, within a few generations, This massive, vibrant civilization would begin to vanish, leaving behind only their shell-built mountains. What changed? And how did a simple act of hospitality lead to the bloodiest afternoon in Florida's history? The answer lies in a clash of steel and spirit that began the moment the Spanish stepped off their boats. It's the 8th of September, 1565. The air is so thick with humidity it feels like liquid. From the deck of the San Pelayo, a lone bugle sounds, its brassy notes slicing through the heavy silence of the Matanzas River. As the longboats scrape against the white sand of Saloy, a man steps forward who looks more like a crusader than a colonist. Pedro Menendez de Aviles, clad in polished steel that reflects the unforgiving Florida sun, drops to his knees. He kisses a wooden cross held by Father Francisco Lopez de Mendoza Grajales. But look past the velvet and the silver. This isn't just a religious ceremony, it's a declaration of war. Menendez hasn't come just to build, he has come to purge. Just a few miles north, at Fort Caroline, a group of French Huguenot Protestants have dared to plant their own flag on Spanish-claimed soil. In the assaults of the Spanish crown, this isn't just a border dispute, it is a battle for the very soul of the New World. The scene that afternoon is a surreal collision of cultures. While the soldiers unload barrels of salted pork and heavy cannons, the Timucua watch from the edges of the palmettos. What follows is a moment that most American history books conveniently skip: the real First Thanksgiving. There are no cranberries or turkeys here. Instead, Spanish sailors and Timucua warriors sit together on the sand, sharing a meal of cocido, a thick stew of garbanzo beans and hardtack and red wine. It is a fragile peace, cemented by a shared meal and a Catholic Mass, occurring 55 years before the Pilgrims would even see Plymouth Rock. But the smell of incense wouldn't last. The wind was shifting. A massive hurricane was brewing off the coast, a storm that would wreck the French fleet and hand Menendez a brutal opportunity. He would march his men overland through knee-deep swamps in a driving rain to take Fort Caroline by surprise. The aftermath would give a permanent, chilling name to the inlet south of the city: Matanzas. In Spanish, it means the slaughters. At this inlet, Menendez offered the surrendering Frenchmen a choice: renounce their faith or face the knife. Over 200 men were executed on that sand, their blood soaking into the same dunes where tourists now sunbathe. Why would a man who began his colony with a prayer end it with a massacre? And how could a city born in such violence eventually become a beacon of freedom for the most oppressed people in North America? To understand that, we have to look at the walls that were built to protect this blood-soaked ground walls that seem to have a life of their own. If the village of Saloy was the city's cradle, then the Castillo de San Marcos was its indestructible ribcage. But for decades, that ribcage was made of wood and wood burns. After the pirate Robert Searle leveled the town in 1668, the Spanish realized they needed something better. They needed a miracle. And they found it buried just beneath the sand on Anastasia Island. It's called coquina. At first glance, it looks like a crude, crumbly mess of compressed seashells. If you were a British general looking through your spyglass in 1702, you would have laughed. To a military mind trained on the granite fortresses of Europe, this soft, porous rock looked like a joke. It looked like a wall made of crackers. But as the British batteries opened fire, the laughter stopped. Imagine the sound. A massive 2-4-pound iron ball screams across the bay and slams into the wall with enough force to shatter a mountain. You brace for the explosion of stone shards and the collapse of the bastion. But the sound that follows isn't a crack. It's a dull, sickening thud. The cannonball doesn't shatter the wall. It sinks into it. The coquina doesn't break, it compresses. Like a giant stone sponge, the wall swallows the iron shot. Inside the fort, the atmosphere is a nightmare of sensory overload. 3,000 citizens, nearly the entire population of the city, are crammed into the damp, vaulted rooms. The air is a choking fog of black powder smoke and the salt-heavy stench of unwashed bodies. You hear the rhythmic, bone-shaking boom, boom, boom of the Spanish cannons returning fire from the gun deck above, a vibration so deep it rattles the very marrow of your bones. But you are safe. You are inside the only fortress in the world that actually grows denser the more it is hit. The Castillo never fell. Not once. It survived every siege, every fire, and every empire that tried to break it. But while the coquina walls protected the Spanish, they also created a sanctuary for a different kind of survivor. Because just outside these breathing walls, a different kind of revolution was brewing. It wasn't a revolution of empires, but of human souls seeking a freedom that didn't exist anywhere else in the colonies. Who were these people fleeing toward the Spanish flag, and why would the King of Spain offer them a home? To find them, we have to look toward the marshes of the north, where the first line of defense was held by men who had once been in chains. While the history books often tell us that freedom lay to the north, in the late 17th century, the compass of liberty pointed in the opposite direction. Imagine a moonless night in the swampy borderlands between the British Carolinas and Spanish Florida. You are moving through knee-deep black water, the air thick with the smell of sulfur and rotting vegetation. Behind you is the crack of a plantation whip. Ahead of you, through 300 miles of treacherous sawgrass and alligator-infested marshes, is a rumor, a whisper that says if you reach the red and white flag of Spain, you can be a human being again. This was the original Underground Railroad, and it ran south. By 1738, enough of these brave freedom seekers had survived the journey to create something the world had never seen. Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose, or simply Fort Mose, located just 2 miles north of St. Augustine. This wasn't just a military outpost. It was the first legally sanctioned free black town in what is now the United States. The air at Fort Mose carried a different frequency. You wouldn't hear the clink of literal chains here. Instead, you'd hear the sharp, rhythmic commands of a black militia drilling in Spanish, the slap-slap of hands patting out corn cakes, and the murmur of prayers in a language that was once forbidden. The Spanish crown offered a deal: convert to Catholicism, and for the men, pledge your life to the defense of the city. For many, it was a price they were more than willing to pay. But don't mistake this for a peaceful retirement. Fort Mose was the city's shield. These men and women lived on the bloody frontier, knowing that the British were obsessed with reclaiming their property. In 1740, during the Battle of Bloody Mose, these former slaves proved exactly how hard they were willing to fight for their new home, handing the British a crushing and psychological defeat. They built a life out of the mud, defending a city that had given them a chance. But as empires traded Florida back and forth like a playing card, this sanctuary would eventually be reclaimed by the marsh. Yet, the spirit of Fort Mose, the idea that St. Augustine was a place where the marginalized could find a voice, didn't vanish. It just waited for a new group of survivors to arrive. And the next group to walk these streets didn't come from the north. They came from across the Mediterranean, driven by a hunger that almost cost them everything. Picture this. It's 1777. The British Union Jack now flies over the Castillo, and the city has become a crowded, nervous refuge for loyalists fleeing the American Revolution in the north. But 70 miles to the south, in a mosquito-choked indigo plantation called New Smyrna, a different kind of revolution is reaching its breaking point. The people there aren't soldiers or politicians. They are the Minorcans, over 1,000 men, women, and children from the Mediterranean islands, Greece, and Italy, lured to Florida by false promises of land and prosperity. Instead, they've spent 9 years in literal hell. They are starving, beaten, and dying of malaria at a rate that would make a battlefield look peaceful. But they have a secret. In the dead of night, a group of them gathers around a humble priest, Father Pedro Camps. they make a choice that sounds like suicide. They will walk to Street Augustine. Close your eyes and imagine the journey. 70 miles of trackless Florida wilderness. No roads, no shoes, just the rhythmic squelch-squelch of bare feet in the black, sulfurous mud. You are wading through waist-deep swamps, your skin being shredded by sawgrass and your blood drained by clouds of salt marsh gnats. You are carrying children and the few icons of your faith that haven't been lost to the mud. When this bedraggled, ghostly line of survivors finally reaches the city gates of Street Augustine, they don't look like conquerors. They look like the walking dead. But they represent something the British didn't expect, a grit that could not be broken. They pleaded with the British governor for their freedom, and they won. They moved into the narrow streets of the old city, into the small, coquina-walled houses that the Spanish had left behind. They didn't just survive, they became the heartbeat of the town. As you walk down George Street today, look at the overhanging balconies and the hidden courtyards that's their touch. And if you sit down at a local tavern, you'll encounter their most famous legacy, the datil pepper. Small, yellow, and deceptively innocent-looking, the datil is a sensory explosion. It's sweet, fruity, and then bam, it hits you with a searing, volcanic heat. It's the flavor of Street Augustine. It is the taste of a people who went through fire and swamp to keep their culture alive. The Minorcans turned a military outpost into a community. But as the 19th century arrived, the world outside was changing again. The age of empires was ending, and the age of the tycoon was about to begin. How did a dusty, crumbling fortress town transform into the most decadent winter playground for the world's richest men? The answer arrived on a train, fueled by oil, and a vision that would rewrite Florida's future forever. Close your eyes and inhale. The air has changed. It's no longer the smell of rotting swamp mud or the acrid bite of black powder. It's January 1888. The air is sweet, perfumed with the intoxicating scent of blooming orange blossoms and the rich, heavy aroma of high-grade Cuban tobacco. The rhythmic, deafening sound you hear isn't the roar of a cannon. It's the arrival of the Florida East Coast Railway. Out steps a man in a sharp linen suit, his eyes possessed by the cold, million-dollar calculation of the oil business. Henry Morrison Flagler. Flagler, the co-founder of Standard Oil, didn't just come to Florida to retire, he came to invent it. He looked at the dusty, crumbling coquina streets of Street Augustine and didn't see an old Spanish outpost. He saw the American Riviera. As you walk toward the heart of Flagler's vision, the Hotel Ponce de Leon, the sheer audacity of the architecture hits you. This isn't just a building, it's a fantasy made of poured concrete and crushed coquina. You see towering red-tiled spires, intricate terracotta carvings, and a courtyard that feels like a palace in Madrid. Inside, the sensory overload continues. You are standing under the glow of 4,000 electric lights installed by Thomas Edison himself at a time when most of the world was still squinting by candlelight. You hear the soft rustle of silk gowns and the clinking of crystal glasses as the nation's elite, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Astors gather for a winter season of decadence. But Flagler didn't just build hotels, he built a brand. He marketed the ancient as a commodity. He realized that in a young, raw nation like the United States, people were hungry for a past they didn't have. He gave them narrow streets, carriage rides, and a sanitized version of Spanish history. Street Augustine was reborn, not as a fortress, but as a stage. Yet, as the champagne bubbles rose in the Ponce de Leon, the city's older residents, the Minorcans, and the black community watched from the edges of the gilded curtain. They knew that beneath this new coat of luxury paint, the city still bore the deep, jagged scars of a much darker struggle that had occurred just decades earlier. To understand the true tension of this town, we have to look past the silk and the chandeliers. back to a time when Street Augustine wasn't a playground, but a prisoner of war. How did a city that had survived every foreign empire handle being occupied by its own countrymen? Step back to March 1862. The air is heavy with a silence more oppressive than cannon fire. Street Augustine has just surrendered to Union forces, not with a roar, but a bloodless whisper. As you walk the bayfront, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of Federal boots on coquina stone signals a new, unwanted order. The stars and stripes fly over the Castillo, now a Union garrison. Inside the narrow alleys, a jagged division splits the town. Old Minorcan and Spanish families shutter their windows, refusing to look at their occupiers. Neighbors who once traded datil peppers now trade narrow, suspicious glares. It is a city under occupancy, a prisoner of its own geography. This era left a lingering question. How does a town, built on survival, handle the slow erosion of its own identity? The loop of history was tightening, and the next explosion wouldn't come from a ship, but from the conscience of a nation. Fast forward to June 1964. The Florida heat is no longer just oppressive. It's electric, with the scent of a brewing storm. But this storm isn't coming from the Atlantic. You are standing outside the Monson Motor Lodge on the bayfront. The air is a thick, humid soup that smells of stagnant pool water, heavy floor wax, and the sharp, stinging tang of chlorine. This is the moral flashpoint of the entire American South. Listen to the unique percussion of this era. The rhythmic thump-thump of protesters' feet on the hot pavement, and the brave, melodic spirituals rising against the guttural snarls of the KKK. Suddenly, a sound that stops the world. A splash. You see integrated swimmers in the hotel pool, and then the manager, James Brock, pouring muriatic acid into the water near them. The chemical hiss and the panicked screams follow, a sensory shock vibrating all the way to the White House in Washington. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is here, calling this the most lawless city he has ever encountered. Why did this ancient relic of an outpost become the forge where the Civil Rights Act was finally hammered into reality for every American today? This city was the pivot for justice. In June 1964, Street Augustine was truly the most consequential place. You lie in your bed as the cool Atlantic breeze brings relief. Through the open window, you hear the rhythmic tapping of the night watchman's staff on the uneven cobblestones of Avila Street. 10 o'clock, and all is well, he calls out, his voice echoing against walls that have stood since the days of empires. But as you've seen, this story was never just about quiet nights. It is a story of layers of Timucua shells beneath Spanish stone, of Minorcan courage fueling the city's heart, and of a moral fire in 1964 that changed the world. You aren't just visiting a museum. You are walking through a living soul that refused to be conquered by hurricanes, sieges, or time itself. The words forged here, the freedom won here, and the stone that breathes here remain as a testament to human spirit. You walked through the consequential year zero of the American experiment. History isn't static. It is the ground you walk on. Thanks for joining us in this reconstruction of Street Augustine. If you enjoyed this journey through time-warp cities, hit subscribe and tell us, what city should we digitally resurrect next? History is waiting. See you very soon.